Trees are very interesting concepts. They're very interesting things because, most people recognize trees as part of vegetation in terms of plants and the greenery that really differentiates this planet from every other planet depends on the type of person you are in terms of your background. When the concept of a tree enters your mind, you can think of it as a decarbonization tool. A tree with its leaves extracts carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and converts that into simple sugars like glucose that it uses. If you're a nature lover, you may think of a tree as some type of companion because trees are ubiquitous in nature in terms of they usually form the ground level process for the emergence of a sustainable ecosystem. Green living things literally form the basis upon which you build an entire ecosystem. You have animals that eat grass, for instance, and those animals now form the food source in some way, or different ways, for other animals. And that way, the energy captured by trees and plants in general, the energy captured from the sun, is recycled through nature. If you've been listening to me, you must have heard me say that the sun is the animator of the potential for life. The sun is what gives material things, material organizations, the ability to animate themselves, So all movement, basically, that life exhibits is the energy from the sun being recycled. Now, if that energy is not sufficient, then that potential remains in stasis. It remains frozen. For instance, if you look at the outer planets, in Uranus, Neptune, even Saturn and Jupiter, they are frozen in some sense. They are in stasis. Now, as the sun advances in age and reaches a particular time period where it begins to expand and become hotter, those outer planets begin to thaw. They begin to melt in a certain way so that their frozen atmosphere begins to gasify. Because it's a correct thing to assume that at the center of these outer planets, you have some type of rocky core. It may be very small, surrounded by metallics, and then that's now surrounded by frozen gases, so to speak. Methane, hydrogen, etc. But the reality of the matter is that as the sun becomes hotter in its intensity and it grows larger towards maybe a red giant or something, all these outer planets will change. They will become more like Earth in some sense, in that the frozen state of these gases, because their atmospheres have been solidified due to extreme cold, those will gasify and probably blow off or blow away. And then what will remain is some type of planet that looks like Earth or even Mars or maybe even Venus. Now, as for the inner planets, it's hard to tell what will happen to them. Their orbits may elongate with the growth of the sun, or the sun may consume them completely. Now, this probably, according to mainstream science, this probably won't happen for billions of years, etc., right? But that is not the essence of this conversation. The essence of this conversation is to look at a tree, a basic tree, as the synthesis of two types of realities. Now, you have the part of the tree that reaches for the light, and you have the part of the tree that reaches for the darkness in the ground. Now, the one that first emerges is that when you plant a seed, the seed, first of all, develops a root system into the ground before it now consolidates its growth by projecting leaves that can actually reach for the light. And then it uses the ability to collect sunlight to split water, essentially. It uses the energy of sunlight and carbon dioxide to split water so as to create glucose. Photosynthesis is the functional equivalent of glycolysis in the human. And if you have listened to the biochemistry of living memory, which is my paid podcast, very new podcast, you would have heard me explain how life basically originates and why. You would have heard me explain how life is sustained. You would have heard me explain why glycolysis and photosynthesis is the basis for living memory. The interesting thing about glycolysis and photosynthesis is that they're all based on the sixes. Go ahead and write the chemical equation for photosynthesis and the chemical equation for glycolysis, which is the oxidation of glucose. It's all about the sixes. Glucose itself is a hexose. It's the simplest hexose. Hex is 6. Now, this is not a conversation about that either. Rather, this conversation is more conceptual, because the unity that is described by the concept of a tree, being able to connect this reaching for the sun aspect of itself in a bid to feed the roots that are always hidden. The entire point of projecting leaves and catching the sunlight, trapping the sunlight and using that energy, the entire point is to feed the roots. If you chop down the projecting aspect of a tree that reaches for the light, it can regrow itself, it can regenerate as long as the root systems are intact. But if you take away the roots, if you chop off the roots, then the tree is in trouble, because the part without the roots, it dies. Now, if you replant the part that has been chopped off, the projecting part, the first thing it will do, if it is to survive, is to develop another root system. So that you can say that the plant is predominantly its roots, but it remains unbalanced because the roots cannot develop sustenance except they reach for the light. So that what the plant truly is a synthesis of two realities into the basic nature of unity. And that is the essence of the conversation I'm trying to have today. Because the same thing applies in human nature. A synthesis of two seemingly different types of realities. They're not really different, but they seem different. And the ability to synthesize these two different types of reality into oneness, which is what synthesis is all about. It's about synthesizing, bringing together different things in varying proportions, in varying ways, so to speak, so as to synchronize them into a unity, into a harmony. Because that's what it really is. It is the concept behind the emergence of human behavior and human personality. Because we are all these things. We are so many things in that sense, and yet we are a unity. And because we are a unity, we go on to seek unity. And so we seek unity within ourselves, we seek unity with another, and then we seek unity with others. And this is symbolized by 3 different astrological signs: the sign of Cancer, the sign of Scorpio, and the sign of Pisces. This is the first place you hear this in the 5 principles of organized complexity. You don't get that anywhere else, because I literally put these things together. Because these astrological signs represent the end stage of 3 important quadrants that exist within your natal chart, within astrology as a whole. But what are these quadrants? They are aspects of the self in 3 different stages of development. Okay? Because these 3 different stages represent the life story of every human, every sentient, self-aware human on this planet. It is the striving for the acceptance of self, the striving for the acceptance with another or of another, and then the striving for acceptance on a wider whole with others. These 3 different levels of acceptance form the basis of the human life story. And every human being is on that journey, whether they are aware of it or not. Because it is only on the basis of these 3 quadrants and the unification that they propose that a human being can truly feel the synthesis of themselves, which is the unity that they are. It is that unity and the search for unity that has brought a human being into this awareness to experience what can only be described as a physical reality. Now, the interesting thing about a physical reality and the experience of it is that it is extended in space and time. Now, this is not something that is normal to the human, to wherever it is the human is coming from. Because at the root source, where a human is coming from, which in my podcasts I call the primordial consciousness, the universal mind. If you're religious, you can call it God. The root source of that has no space and time. There's no extension of anything. There's no division. There's always a constant unity. And it is a unity typified by something very important. It is a unity typified by incomprehensible love, incomprehensible bliss, incomprehensible ecstasy, incomprehensible orgasmic experience. That is the nature of that sort of beingness. And it has no space and time. So there's nothing like a place or a time or aging or degradation or anything. It doesn't mean that things don't have some type of existence. They do. but it is an existence that is not underlain by the requirements or the prerequisites of space and time. And what that simply means is that there is no possibility for concealment. There is no possibility for a degradation in understanding, because the reality system that is space and time, what it does, it provides an avenue for deception. It provides an avenue for ignorance, because a being is separated from that which they know. That's what it means to have space and time. So that you now need to experience a space and a time perceived as various forms of distances within consciousness to that which is known or that which can be known. That distance itself is the nature of effort, and it exists for a reason. Because part of the human experience is the ability to deal with that effort. Because the effort is apparent. It exists because of the type of reality system that a human being is willing to learn from. The human story requires ownership. A perception of a self that is truly independent. That's how we perceive our reality today. It is the need for that independence. It's apparent because it's not real. It is the need for that independence that is the nature of space and time. Because it means that a human being must be separated in some sense into a feeling of individuality, a feeling of being cut off, a feeling of being isolated. It is how we experience the physical world. I use the term apparent because it doesn't actually exist. That's really what it is. And so in order to prove that it doesn't exist in that sense, that's why you have a natal chart. Because when you come into this reality, you come in as a very specific type of pattern. And what is a pattern? A pattern is some type of periodic or cyclical type of behavior. Or not. Because when something has no pattern, that's also a pattern in that sense. Okay? So a pattern is some type of consistency perceived on some type of level. And what it really is a reduction of infinite complexity. Because infinite complexity is the thing that you can never define, because it's infinitely complex, and that means that you can never wrap your mind around it truly. So we can assume that at that infinite complexity, you have the universal mind, the supreme intelligence, God. Now, a reduction of that infinite complexity is what physical existence is, because the reduction itself is a creation of space and time. Because what is being reduced is the dimensionality of that experience in that sense. So that things acquire a type of distance to understanding. So that in that reduced space, you can see what it is that you are trying to learn, even though you don't understand it. And then you can move towards it, and by traversing the distance, either spatial temporarily or within your consciousness, because they're one and the same, then you can acquire an understanding of that. And the process of acquiring understanding of something is the process of connecting to it. But what is a connection? I mean, in physics, a connection is a gauge theory. That's really what it is, right? And gauge theories are used to define, in the standard model of particle physics, they're used to define interactivity, the fundamental forces of nature. But that connection itself, I have said a lot of times, is a physics of blackness, because it is underlain by the sixes. There's just no way to get around it. The point of the connection is to diminish the distance between you and something. And what that really is the reduction in the perceived apparent distance between you and the understanding of that thing. Because to understand it is to internalize it, is to incorporate it, is to reconcile yourself back to unity. That's really what it is, because all knowledge is self-knowledge. Now, we don't experience that immediately. Why? Because we perceive things as being outside of ourselves. That's the structure and the environment that creates the human experience. But it is apparent. The aim of the experiment is to achieve a collapse of all of this. To come to the realization that there's really no such thing. That all that exists, all that can exist, and all that will ever exist is unity. As a result of that, there is really no distance between self-awareness and what it knows about itself. The natural state, the orgasmic experience, the infinite orgasmic experience, the infinite bliss, the infinite deepest love is self-awareness as it is. Because it's a continuous unity between you and the supreme intelligence. There's really no you in that sense. to generate the feeling of you, there has to be a little distance so that you can see or perceive something as being separate from you, or being separate. That separateness, that tiny little separateness, it is what is destined to diminish asymptotically for all infinity, so that you see yourself on a continuous reconciliatory path with the Supreme Intelligence. That's really what it is. The human experience exists because the human needs to have ownership for this, because of self-awareness, individuality. How else can you prove that you are? I have given the example many times that if you bring a true artificial intelligence into existence, whatever the hell that means, because if you bring such a thing into existence, then it's no longer artificial. The highest intelligence you can bring into existence is human intelligence. Because a human being is the most complex thing known in physical existence. You don't know anything more complex than the human. So if you achieve any type of intelligence and it is truly a replication of human intelligence, then the first thing it will do is to separate itself from you. Otherwise, there is absolutely no way to define it as an intelligence. So its true test of intelligence would be a certain level of disobedience. Being able to say, you, me. That is the creation of space-time. Because it is space-time that allows such things to be possible. So that you look within a space. Because what exactly is a space? A space is just a set of some kind, wherein which individual things appear to be separated from each other. But the reality of the matter is that that space exists as a unity. So everything in that space exists as a unity because there are connections between everything. Now, when you say that there is ignorance, it is because a self-aware being that really is the realization of that space, the fully connected form of that space, is unaware of these connections. So that in that sense, they are unaware of themselves. And as a result of that, they see a reality system where you have things that are separated by light years even. And that such a thing does not truly exist, because the separation itself is a separation within self-consciousness. It is a separation within the awareness, and thereby it is a reduced form of what the truth is. That there is no separation. There is no space and there is no time. So what exactly is it that exists in that sense in the human experience? It's ignorance. The lack of connections. And since the connections are typified and underlain by a physics of blackness, they have been made much worse in a reality system as constructed on earth that disavows blackness. It disavows blackness. It wants to separate itself from blackness, so much so that blackness has been driven underground as a taboo. And so it creates a reality system that does not contain blackness. And people are wondering why the world is filled with so much hate. Because that's the reality system that you get once you deny all the connections. Once you do that, you deepen the isolation everything in that space and time feels. And as a result of that, you come to see that space and time containing concepts that are receding from you. You come to see an expanding universe where everything is flying away from you. Because that is the state of awareness. You come to see a space-time that you cannot reconcile to yourself anymore. So you appear to be plunging into a physical universe. And if it goes on long enough, you see yourself as some incomprehensible, nonsensical thing within the vastness of space and time. You come to the realization that there's no point to it all. It's entirely hopeless. It's useless. It's meaningless. What is the point? The earth is so small, lost in the infinitude of space-time, that it might as well disappear and nothing would even bother. You see, that's a malaise in self-consciousness. It's a problem deep within the psyche, because there is no such thing. And as a result, on the human level, the human experiences a disconnect between themselves and all others. And that is the nature of isolation. It is isolation that is born out of ignorance. It is that same type of isolation that breeds fear. It is fear that breeds hate and the need to separate the self. Because when you are afraid, automatically your body and your reality system begins to program defensive measures. That's why you have countries who can turn around and say, look, we spend $1 trillion on defense every year. Who exactly are you defending yourself from? It's because you are in a malaise. You're actually suffering a severe mental illness, but you don't know. Because there is a system that generates that ignorance. There is a system that generates that mental illness as a way of life. Do you realize what that truly is? Do you realize what the impact of that is? What the meaning of that truly is? It's beyond belief. You need to listen to the biochemistry of living memory, the physics of blackness, the evidence, part 1 to 6, for you to truly understand the impact of this, because it is catastrophic. Because a living, self-aware being that is on that trajectory, they are telling themselves the exact story that leads to their extinction. Because that's what you are basically saying. Once you begin to disconnect, because the disconnection is apparent, you cannot really disconnect from a reality, because all of it is synthesized into one. But when you begin the narrative and to internalize the narrative of separation and isolation, it's a type of mental insanity. You begin to tell yourself the type of narrative that leads to your own extinction, because you are telling all of existence that you are not fit to be self-aware. You are not fit to receive the grace of God that is self-awareness, the unification of all things. That's what you're basically saying. And once you deny the existence of God, in terms of once you deny this type of realities, then you literally cease to exist, because everything in existence requires the supreme intelligence to give it existence. Now, you would say, why would human beings do this? Well, it's simple. It's because this description of this connection and synthesis into unity is a physics of blackness. That's why. That's the only reason. Because the reality system has a problem with that. The problem is apparent. It doesn't really exist. But it has conjured up this thing as a problem because of something else that is much deeper in the psyche. Something that has been begging for healing from the moment it was recognized. But instead of moving towards healing, it moved towards even greater separation. And the distance, the gulf between the healing, the actual healing, and the recognition that there is a malaise, that distance is called denial. Denial is, people think, I don't know what you think denial is, but denial, first of all, requires the awareness of truth. Because the only thing that can be denied is the truth. The more truthful you know something is, the greater the impact denial has on the psyche. So denial by necessity requires a two-stage process. Now, if you know for an absolute fact, and this knowing I'm talking about, it's not a question of belief. You can believe whatever you want. That's not important. It's a matter of conviction. And conviction is not something that human beings really control within themselves. Because the process of acquiring conviction is the process of gathering evidence. Evidence informs you of the nature of conviction, but it is not a conscious gathering of evidence. It is the evidence that yourself, as it exists before the will is manifest. It is how that consciousness sees reality. So it is taking place below the level of self-awareness, so to speak. It's very instinctual in that sense. And its job is to correctly form the foundation upon which the interpretation of truth can be made. Because what the individual human is trying to do is to interpret that truth in a way that they can gain ownership of it. Because that now forms the basis upon which the focal point of self-awareness, which is the will, can be built and erected. Okay? And it is at that interface that you have the nature of denial. Because denial is a conscious will to disregard what the individual already knows to be true. The truth as afforded or as put forward by an instinctual part of self. And what is that truth? That all of existence really is united in what I call organized complexity, or a physics of blackness. It's in everything. The sixes are in everything, including you. Your entire self-awareness is built on it. The reality system that you experience is built on it. Every living creature is running because of it. The entirety of the complex systems that maintain this universe, they're all running on it. It is one of the most undeniable things you can imagine. And yet, it is in absolute denial within the human psyche. And that is causing absolute havoc. Because it destroys the human psyche. Because it creates a distance between you and the supreme intelligence. That's really what it is. Okay? And so every single natal chart is carrying the symbolic representation of this fragmentation. And yet, all of that is represented within a circle. So it is a fragmentation that is begging for unity. It's already united. The only difference is that you do not know that it is united. That's the only difference. So that reality really is composed of the reality of the supreme intelligence and no other. So that the human story really is the human being's measure of ignorance. That's really what it is. Because every natal chart carries two levels, two layers to it. There is the soul level reality, which is the only reality. Then the question that is raised in that soul level reality is what creates the human experience. And so the human comes into this reality to answer that question. And everything about your life is geared towards answering that question. Almost all the time, the question is always very primordial and extremely powerful, and also extremely very simple. Because the resolution of your life, in terms of your destiny and what you are here to achieve, including your greatest fulfillment, because fulfillment is something that a human being experiences once they're able to piece the entire picture together. That's what natal chart synthesis is supposed to do. Now, there's another attempt at fulfillment, because the truth is that once this type of reality was purged of blackness, people literally went insane. Because you cannot exist as a living self-aware being without the realization of God. It's impossible. You are talking about insanity, basically. And so religion was created as an addendum, something you just add. Okay, it's like designing a house, then maybe you forgot to include bathrooms. You built this magnificent house, but it doesn't contain any bathrooms. And going to the bathroom is an essential part of human nature, so to speak. And so what do? You build outhouses, bathrooms that are somehow disconnected from the main property. So if you want to use the bathroom, you go to the main property. The problem is that you have to leave the edifice itself and go to an outhouse or something. I'm just using a very quick analogy. But that's not the solution, because it will never give the fulfillment, because the outhouse or whatever is disconnected from the main property. And the problem is that because it's disconnected, you have various types of outhouses. You have to go there in the middle of the night at different times of the day and all that. You have to leave something and then go somewhere. That's not the way that it works, because that is not the nature of human experience. You do not leave some aspect of human experience to go somewhere so as to be able to reconcile yourself to unity. It doesn't work like that. You are either one whole or you are insane. That's really what it is. So that religion is not the answer. And that's why nobody understands it. People will tell you, they will swear by whatever, that they understand it. They will describe various aspects, but that's not true. Because the true test of understanding is a connection. And once connections exist, they always reflect the physics of blackness. Always. And their job is to collapse existence back into the unity that it is. That's the nature of truth. Anything that doesn't do that is a falsehood. And so you cannot have religion containing truths that people actually understand and recognize. And then they're killing each other. And then it is used as a basis for hate and discrimination and cruelty and wickedness and all these human misery and suffering. This is bunk. Because those actions themselves, those consequences, they reflect the fact that you have no idea what this is. You have no idea what it's talking about. You're just making it up as you go along. It doesn't matter what you believe. Your belief system is in your head. It's a story that you're telling yourself on some level. And it's an act of will. So that if your belief system does not coordinate and correspond and synchronize with your convictions, then you are out of sync. In other words, you're insane. That's really what it is. Because your belief system is part of self-delusionary processes if they are uncoupled from conviction. Because it is convictions that create realities. And so what you have is a belief system that is at war with its natural conviction. And that conflict is what you see in the world. Different people. My God is bigger than your God. My God is more powerful than your God. So if I can hunt you down and eliminate you and all your kinfolk, then that means my God is superior. After all, I can kill you all. Do you realize how insane this is? And why do you think all of this exists like this? It's because you have disavowed blackness. So what's the basis for unity? What's the basis for connection? Not only have you disavowed it, you have made it taboo. So you have implemented a system of white supremacy and racism. So that's basically a death knell. That's like saying we should all go extinct. That's really what it is. You cannot say that you understand the truth of God's existence and you hate blackness. You hate blackness to the point where you create a world where your aim is to impoverish, dehumanize, destroy all so-called black Africans in the world. This is bunk. It means you don't understand anything. It means you're just cosplaying. You're basically telling yourself some type of story that is devoid of any connection to truth. It means you're insane. That's what it really means. Now, here's my closing statement. When the world begins to reconcile, because it must be reconciled, like I told you, the truth and the reality is what is. Everything else, human suffering, misery, these are all apparent things. They are things that are sitting on the reality. The reality does not change. It is static, uninteractive, fixed, immobile. It doesn't change. It doesn't move. You cannot induce it into something else. It is what it is. Then the human story is sitting on top of that as a narrative, a dysfunctional narrative in that sense. But it cannot really do anything to the real reality, so that the human story itself is apparent. Okay? Now, when the human story begins to reconnect and reconcile to the truth of the supreme intelligence existence, you will know the first sign is this, is that correction is the fact that blackness itself becomes more and more comfortable in the world. So that when I see people talk about the technological marvel that is the 21st century, they talk about how amazing the world is with technology, computers, AI and all that. These people have no idea what they're talking about. They do not realize that they are in the bosom of the deepest level of human ignorance ever experienced on this planet. That those things that they say in our technological marvels and they're using as evidence for human greatness and human intellectual achievement, those are the things that are killing you. They are destined to kill you. That is your tomb. It's your burial chamber. Because in the absence of life, the only consequential existence is death. That's really what it is. It doesn't matter what you tell yourself. You can tell yourself whatever you want. It doesn't mean anything. Because in a world that is undergoing the correction towards the reality of the supreme intelligence, blackness begins to be more and more comfortable in the world. So that a reality system that calls itself elevated, and yet you look at the entirety of Black Africa, the entirety of blackness in the world is in its worst possible state. That reality system is delusional. Completely delusional. It's insane. And it is heading for extinction. You don't need to take my word for it. It's an absolute fact. I don't know what else you need to see in the world to convince you of this. But if you're looking for that type of conviction, that's your business. This is what it is. And it is not based on knowledge that changes day after day. It is not based on an understanding that changes minute after minute. This is what it is. I don't give a damn if you believe me or not. You will see it with your eyes. But if you are waiting to see this, it probably will be the last thing you see. My real question to you is, why the hell do you need to experience that? Is it not apparent already? Do you not know this truth? It's for this reason that I created those 6 lectures. The biochemistry of living memory, the physics of blackness, the evidence. That's why I created those set of podcasts. I'm just sharing this perception because I do not understand why self-aware beings would tell themselves stories that lead them to their own extinction, to their own demise. What kind of intelligence is that? You look at the supreme intelligence, the earth being able to create life and sustain life is a mimicry of that supreme intelligence. And then you destroy this ability of the earth to create and sustain complex life forms, and then you say that you are intelligent. You have no idea what the word means. You create a reality system of humans that are being murdered in their millions, billions even, and you say that you are intelligent. You have no idea what that word means. And what I'm saying is that it doesn't matter what you call yourself. You see, these human stories, like I said, they're just apparent, they're not the real thing. So it doesn't matter whether you lie. Who exactly are you deceiving when you lie? You know the truth, and that's all that matters. So that deception is as futile an effort as anything you can imagine. Because you only think that deception actually creates an alternate reality because you are ignorant of what is going on. Deception always leads to truth. Meaning you start out trying to deceive. It's just a matter of time. That's the conspiracy of life, because the universal mind, the primordial consciousness, God, controls all of existence. So there's no alternative. There's no choice, really. So you start off with this type of deceptive behavior, deceptive everything. Everything is a lie. You will eventually end up at the truth. Just from the other side. Okay? And it will be very painful because it's coming from the other side. And it is because of the inability to receive directly the true gift of God, which is absolute knowledge. This is divine connection where everything is known. Everything is understood. this orgasmic bliss, infinite ecstasy, a deepest love and compassion, can't receive it. And so you create a route to receiving it, which goes the other side, the other direction, a long and painful trajectory. And ultimately, that's where you end up. You end up in the same place. This route, this long route round, that's the nature of a life story, really. Because that is what we also do individually. Because when you look at the potential of a human being as they are born, as they come into this reality, they're carrying a soul level contract, which now turns into a human story that they try to implement as a reality. The gift of that implementation is a return to the united orgasmic experience that existed before they became human. But the downside of this is that if you fail, then you are trapped in a fragmented world that can only be defined as suffering, misery, ignorance, conflict, and then death. So it is up to every human being to recognize and reconcile their life story, because that's the nature of synthesis. How to bring things that seemingly seem disparate and disconnected, how to bring them all together into a view of oneness. And the best way you can do that is when you look into the eyes of the other. The other doesn't actually exist because it's part of you. After all, you are the one that is doing the looking. And the other that is looking at you, you don't really exist to them. You are part of them also, because they are the ones doing the looking through their own eyes. So that in that way, every human being carries an entire universe, an entire reality system in their heads. How connected that reality system is depends on how much they know, how much they realize that this is what is going on. And it's a quantification or a measurement of the degree of that physics of blackness within their heads. So if you create a reality system where this is completely disavowed or not allowed, then you can imagine the type of pain that every human being is carrying within them, most without realizing it. Why? Because you can always project that pain into anything, everything really. It's the fault of this person, it's the fault of that person, is the other, etc., etc., etc. Okay?